Slave to freedom is one of the dumbest things I have ever heard. And since people are being very stubborn about this, I'd like to share some examples to simplify why it looks very stupid and makes zero sense in my eyes. How do I start this? Oh, right. Cactus Shash is a Jew. Cactus Shash is a Jewish person. Let me give an example using the Holocaust then. In this example, Cactus Shash is a Holocaust Jew. He's stuck inside a ghetto. What does this mean? It means our beloved Shash over here is not free. How so? Well, Shash is not physically free. Why? Because he is in a ghetto. He is not allowed to go wherever he pleases. He's not allowed to see any of the sights he read about in a special book. Shash is not physically free because his life is under threat. He could either starve to death, die of disease, or transported to a death camp and gassed. These threats on his life alone make him emotionally and mentally unfree. But see, that's not what Shash has in mind. He wants to be free. He desires for freedom. Freedom from his racial oppression. Freedom from the ghettos that caged him in. Freedom from people that want to kill him. So, through any means necessary, he will escape. He plans his escape. Long story short, one day he finally does it. Somehow he manages to escape the ghetto, escapes his pursuers. Longer story short, he somehow escapes Germany. Later on, when he retells his story of how he freed himself to a couple of fellows, a stranger arrives midway through his conversation and tells him, "You are not free." Shash looks at him and says, "How am I not free? I physically freed myself from the ghetto. Physically freed myself from people that wanted to kill me, physically freed myself from my racial oppression, and since my life is no longer under threat, I am emotionally and mentally free from the possibility that I might die just because I was a Jew." The stranger looks at him and says, "Because you were in the ghetto, you wanted to be free. You desired to be free. And it was because of that unrelenting desire to be free, to have the freedom and ability to see the sights you saw in that book you read, that you acted upon that desire and freed yourself from that situation. Oh, so I am free." No, you are not free. But I literally physically freed myself. Because of your desire to be free, you are a slave to freedom. And because you are a slave to freedom, and slaves are not free, you are not free. Because I desire with my entire being to be free, I am not free. Yes, it's like you never escaped the ghetto to begin with. That's how unfree you are right now. That does not make any sense. How am I not free? Imagine this, right? A black slave. He wants to free himself from his slavery. He desires so badly to be free. So he kills his slave drivers, slave owners, and physically braces chains, his bondage. The black slave runs away. He escapes his pursuers, like you did. Starts a new life. Is he now free? Yes, because the black slave freed himself from his slavery. No, he is not free. How is he not free? He literally freed himself from slavery. Because he desired to be free. What are you talking about? Because even though the black man freed himself from his slavery, he is still a slave. How is he still a slave? He literally freed himself from slavery. Because he is a slave to freedom. Oh, so because he wanted to free himself from slavery, and he freed himself from his slavery, because he desired to be free from his slavery, he is a slave to wanting to be free from slavery. That's right. Cactus Shash is mind blown by how wrong he is. Recognizes that even though he freed himself from the ghetto and the possibility of being liquidated, he is still not free because he had the audacity to want to be free from Nazi Germany. And because of that desire to be free, Shash is a slave to freedom. So he's not free, even though he freed himself, literally. This makes no sense. And this is me speaking, by the way. And I'll even give another example. Remember, Cactus Shash is a Jew. Shash is a Jewish person. Let's use the story of Exodus in the Bible. Now we know the story of Moses and the Israelites, right? The Israelites were slaves in Egypt. The Israelites desired to be free. Do you see where I'm going with this? Then Moses comes along in the name of their God and sends the 10 plagues onto Egypt until Pharaoh let his people go. The Israelite slaves are now free from their slavery, free to move on to the promised land. But something's wrong here. Isiyama told me that everyone's a slave to something. But the Israelites were freed by God through Moses from their slavery and oppression. They were no longer slaves. They were now free.
Disgusting bad writing. Now how could we possibly fix this? How could we possibly make this writing more intellectual that will blow minds?
Oh, that's right. The Israelites wanted freedom from their slavery. It was their desires to be free. And they were so vocal in their cries for freedom that God heard his people. You know what that means? It means the Israelites were slaves to freedom. That's right. It means that even after they freed themselves from the Egyptians, freed themselves from slavery, the Israelites are still slaves. They are no longer slaves to the Egyptians. They are slaves to freedom. Yeah, makes perfect sense. But I get it. You know why they say slaves to freedom? Because Eren in chapter 139 does not kill 100% of humanity. Because he doesn't kill 100% of humanity, parody dies. That's one of his goals down the drain, but don't worry. With a little bit of recontextualization, turns out Eren never cared about parody this whole time. So now, you can't say that he failed in that goal, because that was never one of his goals in the first place. Eren, with the power of the founding titan, should have the ability to complete the rumbling 100%. By killing 100% of humanity, any threat to his freedom would be gone. Like with my example of the Jew and the black slave, this would mean that he would be literally free. But no, we are supposed to be satisfied with 80% because they tell us that Eren is a slave to freedom. That even if he kills 100% of humanity and literally frees himself from racial persecution, frees himself from being annihilated just because he was born an Eldian, well, he won't be free because he would still be a slave to freedom. Damn, white slave owners should have used this argument on their black slaves.
Hey guys, don't you know? Even if you free yourself from slavery, you would still be a slave. A slave to your desires to be free from slavery. If you don't want to be a slave, don't bother, because you'll always be a slave. In fact, me whipping you because we view you guys as nothing more than animals makes me a slave, just like you guys are slaves. Because by whipping you all day long, I become a slave to my desires to show you your place.
Slave to freedom, what a joke. And before you start, this was not a racist tirade. If a black slave frees himself from slavery, you know what I would say? I would say that that slave is now free. He is no longer a slave. And no amount of pseudo-intellectual mental gymnastics on this planet is going to convince me that that black slave is somehow still a fucking slave.
It's an oxymoron, bro. It's supposed to be ironic, see? Can't you see? Slave to freedom, bro?
Yes, morons. That's exactly what we see.
If Cactus Shash frees himself from a ghetto in Nazi Germany, leaves the entire country, you know what I would do? I would be the first person to shake his hand and say, Shash, you are free. I would wave it in his face, the fact that he is free. You know what I wouldn't say? Shash, just because you freed yourself from the ghetto doesn't mean you're free. Just because you freed yourself from Nazi Germany doesn't make you free. The fact you desire to be free, you desired freedom from Nazi Germany, means you are actually a slave to freedom. Because you acted upon your desires to be free and freed yourself. You are a slave to freedom. So you're actually still not free. No, he would be free. Even I, who thinks Shash is leaning heavily on the special side, even I would recognize that he would be free. Eren wanted to be free from the walls. Free from the outside world that wanted to annihilate him and his people. Eren completely eliminating the threats to his life and his freedom, as well as his people's lives and their freedom, would make Eren literally free. Do you get it? It's not that difficult. A slave to freedom is dumb.